Now, here's where I need help with this. So where I think people might get the idea is, okay, if I'm in a relationship with my wife and she serves me dry chicken again, right? Which is a common theme in my household. And actually, thanks to the internet, it's actually changed now because she's gotten thousands of people that have now sent her how to keep the chicken moist. So she does a great job. But for we're talking about 2 decades of my life. We're talking about dry chicken. This is a problem.
It is.
So, and you know what I did? I didn't say anything because I just would drink more water, more water at dinner.
Yeah.
I fear that sometimes people say, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run around and I'm going to tell the truth to everyone all the time on these little things that don't matter. Now, my actual best example that I've ever heard of this, we had a guy on the podcast named Charlie Plum. He was a pilot in Vietnam. He was shot down on his last mission of his deployment. He was shot down. He was captured. He was in the Hanoi Hilton for 6 years. This is the deal that they had amongst their roommates. So they had roommates in a room smaller than we're in right now. And there'd be 4 of them in there, 3 of them in there, 2 of them there, depending on what was going on. If you did something that annoyed me, if Jordan does something that annoys me, we got to live together. If you do something that annoys me, it's my fault. It's my fault for allowing you click your nails together, or you pick your nose a lot, or you itch your head. Whatever it is that you do that bothers me, it's my problem, and I have to absorb it. Because otherwise what we have like rats in a cage that are going to gnaw each other apart. And I thought about that while I was reading the part of the book that was saying, like, and you actually also later in the book talk about, hey, are you going to get in a fight over this little stupid thing, or are you going to absorb? And I talk about that a lot as a leader, as a person in a relationship. Hey, there's problems from your boss. You absorb them and you don't pass them down to your people. You want us to stay work or stay late and do a bunch of crazy stuff that we don't think we should be doing. Cool. My guys are going to go home. I'm going to absorb that. I'll get it done myself. I'm going to absorb these problems. Now, are there some tertiary effects, of course, or secondary effects that now my boss thinks he can get away with that and all those things? But I just think we have to be careful that we're not just throwing spears of truth in people's heads on a regular basis.
Those are black truths. They're the opposite of white lies, right? So black truths are truths you use to hurt other people with, right? And so technically, in the moment, the statement is factual, but the context belies it, right? Whereas a white lie, it's like, well, it's a little lie, but you're trying to support a larger truth. Not that white lies aren't optimal. It's better not to lie, but sometimes the best you can manage is a white lie. And then maybe that's better.
Pretty good.
Well, okay, so then in those sorts of situations, you think, well, first of all, I have some rules of thumb. If someone does something at work that annoys you, it's like, write it off, man. It's like, that's once. It's like, what does that mean? You're having a bad day, or I'm having a bad day? It's like, doesn't mean anything. Do it twice. Think, it's okay. Let's write that off. It's the same issue. It could still just be circumstance and situation. 3 times. Okay, now there might be grounds for a conversation. You go and say, well, you put your feet up on my desk like a day ago, and that was okay, but then you did it again, and then you did it again. And I'm thinking, it actually happened 3 times, right? So there's no denying it, and perhaps that's not optimal. And then you go for the smallest possible victory. That's the next thing, is like, I'm not telling you that you're, what would you say, that you lack respect or that there's something wrong with you. What I'm asking is that if you come in my office, it would be better for both of us if your feet stayed on the floor. Is that okay? And that's a small thing. You're not going after the person's character, right? You're going after the tiny victory. So you say to your wife, look, I'm thrilled to death that you're cooking me dinner. I'm serious, and it could be a hell of a lot worse than it is, and maybe I could be more helpful around the kitchen. That's certainly a possibility. But I have got this thing with regards to chicken, and maybe it's me, but could we try for a month to cook it differently, and then we'll revisit it. And if I happen to be wrong, I'll shut the hell up. And she might think, okay, well, he is kind of useless around the kitchen, and he's sort of bitchy about the chicken and all of that, but maybe I trust him enough to admit that I made a small mistake and rectify it, and we could go along and not have the damn chicken thing hanging over our heads till we're 80, right?
You just, in your second example there, I tell people this all the time. So you're coming into my office and you're putting your feet on the desk. What I'll generally do is make it my fault. I'll generally say, hey, Jordan, I hate to be like a nitpicker, but I'm really freaked out about germs. It's really stupid, but I am. And when you come in and put your feet on my desk, it freaks me out. Can you just do me a favor and not put your foot on my desk when you come here? The same thing with with the chicken. It's like, hey, you know what? I have a super sensitive palate.
Refined.
And it's a super refined, sensitive palate.
I'm just too refined for your
sorry,
damn chicken.
But and I just... could we maybe figure out another way to cook that, or could we try? But I'll take the blame for the situation rather than you're disrespectful and don't put your feet on my desk. This is
you don't want to adopt more of a position of moral superiority than is absolutely necessary. One of the things I recommend, I don't remember if I wrote it in 12 Rules for Life, I think I did, about how to, let's say you're in an intractable argument with your wife about who's the most reprehensible person, right? Which is where arguments sort of end when they go to hell. You think now you're in one of those arguments and you risk bringing up the past, which is a very, very bad idea, right? Maybe you're saying something like, you've always been this way, you're this way now, and you'll never change, and none of it's good. It's like, oh man, that's a fight, because where are you going to go from there? So one of the things I recommend, and this actually works, is when you're in one of these battles and you can't bloody well get out of it, you separate, each go to your room and you sit and think, okay, that person is really wrong and I'd like to give them a good stomping. But then you think, no, I got to live with them. So that's probably not a good idea, right? Because I don't want to live with someone who's like stomped and angry about it, because they're going to take their revenge, like if they have any spirit at all. So you cannot win an argument with your wife. That's just wrong. You can't. You can make peace. You can come up with a solution. But if you win, she loses, and then she's the loser. And unless you want to have a loser around, that's not a very good strategy. Anyway, so you go to your room and you think, okay, fundamentally flawed as my wife is, particularly in this particular circumstance, there's probably something stupid I did in the relatively recent past that increased the probability that we're in this little hellish place. And you think, what was it? And you think, oh God, I really don't want to know. It's like, I really don't want to know this. And so you think, no, I'm going to figure out where I'm 1% at fault. She's 99% wrong, but I'm 1% at fault. So you sit there and you think, okay, what was it? Then you let your imagination sort of wander over your past stupidities, and you think, oh, there's something I did that was like kind of underhanded and devious and crooked and pathetic and weaselly, and then you go and you tell her, and she does the same thing, and she's just as irritated about it as you are. And then you think, okay. And you say, look, I'm sorry about that, and I know this increased the probability that we're in this like bitchy, horrible place. And she does the same thing, and then you think, oh yeah, well, we're both pathetic losers, and we can quit playing like dominance hierarchy, and then maybe you can have a conversation about how to make it better. And that conversation should be bounded too. It's like the chicken thing is a really good, my father-in-law, who I really like, he used to come, my wife told me this story. He used to come home for lunch, and his wife would feed him lunch, and she always used little plates. And it was like they'd been married for 30 years, and one day he had this explosion at the table about the fact that he'd had to eat off these damn little plates for 30 years. And, it was much more of a large explosion than it had to be. But it's these little things actually matter. They actually matter. You have to straighten them out, because your life, especially with your wife, is composed of about 50 little things that you do every day. And because you do them every day, they're not little. You can just do the arithmetic, It's like maybe you don't like the way your wife greets you when you come home. It's like, okay, is that relevant? Is that important? Well, let's say it takes 10 minutes because you're thinking about it and you're coming home, and then there's the little aftermath. It's 10 minutes. So it's like an hour a week. It's 4 hours a month. It's 50 hours a year. That's one work week. It's 2% of your life. It's like 2% of your life, right? So that's the math. It's like if you got 50 of those things right, your whole life would be right. Think, is it worth fighting about? It's like, yeah, it's worth it because it's 2% of your life, or it's 1% even, whatever. And then you think, okay, well, how should people greet themselves when they first come home? It's like, well, maybe it's not quite like your dog greets you, because your dog is like reprehensibly happy to see you. That's just too much, right? Little kid will do that. Sure. But maybe you want the person to not be watching TV for the second you enter the house. Maybe they should just stop watching TV and come and say, you know, hello, how was your day? And give you a hug. That would be a good thing. And then maybe you do the same thing to them. And you practice that for like 2 months, because you're both stupid and it's really hard for you to learn anything. And then you've got that down. And the dinner times are like that too. Like in lots of households, meal times are really fractured, which is a bad thing. Or they're bitter. It's like, here's your goddamn food. It's like, yeah, I'll eat it, but I can't stand it and you can't cook. It's like, okay, that's 4.5 hours a day, right? For your whole life. You think you're going to like someone like that? Not a bit, man. You're not going to like them. Yeah. So you fix that.
You actually did tell that whole thing in the book, so it's good. It's in there. And actually the phrasing that you used when you say if you win an argument, you said something along the lines of you win that argument, they're the loser.
Yep.
Now you win that argument 100 times. Now in a marriage you win 10,000 times, and you are now married to a loser.
And that loser is not going to be someone who makes any effort whatsoever ever to be attractive to you or anyone else. Yeah. And then you'll think, oh, look who I ended up with. It's like, no, look at who you produced. It's like, good work there, guy.
and that's the so what you're talking about with this argument thing, and you separate, you go in your room and you say, okay, what did I do wrong?
Yeah, what did I do wrong? That's annoying.
What did I do wrong? And interestingly, myself and my buddy Leif Babin, we wrote a book called Extreme Ownership, and the whole premise is you take responsibility for when things go wrong. You say, yeah, this was my fault. So I'll go to clients and I'll be meeting with them. And I'll say, look, when something goes wrong with your team, you guys made a mistake, you fail at whatever you're trying to accomplish, you got to take ownership of it. You stand up and you say, hey, look, this was my fault. And this is what, we're going to do. And the people will say, well, you know what? If I did that, my team is so bad that if I did that with my team, you know what they'd say? They'd say, you're right, it is your fault. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they look at me like, well, so your plan, Jocko, sucks. Because if I say this is my fault, my team is going to look at me and say, you're right, it is your fault. Mm-hmm. And then what do I do? And I kind of get a little bit, maybe a little bit frustrated, because I look at them and I say, that's the whole point. It actually is your fault. You're not just saying it to get out of the problem. You're not just saying it to make excuses for everything that's happening. No, when you say, hey, this is my fault that we got in this argument, and then your wife says, yeah, it is. You don't say, no. No, you say, I know. And you have to mean it. The key part is, you say, I know, and this is what I'm going to do to fix it. And if you're a leader and you say it's my fault, and your team says, yeah, you're right, it is your fault, you say, I know. That's what I just said. And here's what I'm going to do to fix it. So when you take ownership of a problem, it doesn't necessarily make the problem go away. In fact, it doesn't do that at all. Mm-hmm. Once you admit what the problem is and you take ownership of the problem, then you have to say, here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Here's my new plan.
Let's say you're a high school kid and you got a tyrant as a teacher. It's like, well, it could be the case that you have a tyrant as a teacher, and the tyrant is particularly on your case, and you think, well, yeah, that's an awful thing, and this person really is a tyrant. It's like, yeah, but you're not very good at dealing with tyrants. And you might think, well, I shouldn't have to be. It's like, fair enough, man, because who wants tyrants? But the truth of the matter is that there is always tyranny, and if you don't know how to deal with it, if you don't know how to thrive in the face of tyranny even, then there is something wrong with you. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't something wrong with the tyrant. It's like, that's self-evident. But it does mean that you aren't who you could be, because if you were everything you could be, you could manage that situation. And it might be, you'd figure out an exit strategy. I mean, who the hell knows what the solution would be? But if you are conceiving yourself as helpless victim, then that's what you are. And I'm not saying that there aren't situations that people find themselves in where there's it's hard to say, that there's very little you can do. I mean, that woman that we talked about earlier, she was in a pretty damn hopeless situation, and she found something she could do. And I've read these books, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. I mean, he saw people in some pretty damn dire straits, like really, really beyond comprehension. And he noticed even in those situations that people still had their choices to make, And I mean, you tread on that ground with extreme hesitancy, because you don't say, well, man, if I was thrown in the gulag, I would have been noble. It's like, no, probably not, man. You would have been a trustee in about 15 minutes. That's the most likely outcome. So you have to be careful about not getting too high on your horse about such things. But it isn't obvious when you're out of choices. Most of the time you have more choices. You haven't used all the choices you have most of the time. Now, I've seen people in situations I couldn't help them get out of. And people die, right? I mean, you have a fatal illness, you have pancreatic cancer, like you're dead in 6 months. Your choices are limited, but maybe under those circumstances, you figure out how to put your house in order and be what you can to the people who will be left. It's something like that.
For me, and I get a lot of, and I know you get infinitely more than me, but I'll get someone that reports to me a problem or a situation that they're in that seems really bad, and what I've found is the solution that they're looking for, the only solution that they can conceive of, is one that is going to provide that solution within a 2-week time frame. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what we're talking about. If this problem isn't solved in 2 weeks, then this is hell. Mm-hmm. And I always kind of report back and say, hey, you're in a job right now that I understand it's bad. I understand it's your boss is terrible, the team is terrible, whatever the case is, or you're in a situation, or your family is this, or whatever. So conceive a plan right now, and it's not going to take 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It might take 6 months. It might take a year. It might take a year and a half of you saving your money and setting your resume and getting the other skills that you need. If you can extend your time, and I'll tell you what, when you come up with that plan, when you conceive of that plan, immediately you have hope. Mm-hmm. And when you have hope, you can continue on through the miserable existence that you're in, because you know that you've got a plan and you're going to get your way out of it.
Absolutely. Well, I had a client recently, because I've done a lot of consulting as well as clinical work, and often my clients come to me. They're high-functioning people. They have decent jobs, but we make a plan. It's like, well, I'm making $75,000 a year right now, the person says. I said, well, how much? Well, okay, we're gonna improve that. Like, why don't we see if we can triple that? See if we can triple it. It's like, what the hell? Maybe we can't, but maybe we can. Some people do make triple that. Could be you. Okay, so what's wrong with you? Well, you're not educated enough. All right, so we need to fix that. Your resume isn't in order. You're not sending the damn thing out. It's like, well, and then you got to do baseline statistics. It's like, well, how many times do you have to send out your resume to move ahead when you're already in a pretty decent job? Well, the answer isn't 10. The answer is like, you have to send out 5 a day, every day for the next 2 years. And the rejection rate will be so close to 100% that that's what it will feel like, right? But it's a lottery ticket. You only have to win once, so it doesn't matter. If you lose 300 times, it doesn't matter. You just need one hit. So now you got to prepare yourself, because it's going to be brutal, because you're sending out all these, resumes to jobs you're not quite qualified enough for, because you're looking to move up. Brace yourself, right? It's going to be nothing but failure. Nothing but failure. Well, this particular client, I think it took her 2 years, maybe more, 2.5 years of sending out resumes and accelerating her education and practicing, because she'd get an interview now and then and get very close to it, to get that first move, right? But then she got 2 more in the next year, and she was at triple her salary. But, it's like long-term strategic thinking followed by an implementable plan, and then the willingness to tolerate an insane run of ridiculous failures before you move. But I've seen that happen to people. There's no reason that you can't move. You just have to figure out where you want to move. You have to figure out what the criteria are for putting you in that position. And then you have to be some measure of insanely persistent, because it's so unlikely, right? The default answer to the question, can I have this good job, is, are you out of your mind? Of course not. Right. Right. Well, it is. It's like, and even if you're qualified, it's like, yeah, you and 10 other people. Yeah. So there's even an element of chance at it, especially at the end. Like if you're in the top 5, you've done everything you can do to control that outcome. There's some element of chance that's going to be the determining variable, because, maybe I don't know, maybe they didn't like the way your suit looked on you, and that's the only thing that's differentiating you from the other candidate. It's like you also don't want to take that too personally. It's like, well, you hit the top 5, you were shortlisted, you're in there, man. You're in there, you're in the game. Do that 10 times, you'll win one of those contests, but you got to do it 10 times. So, and even in lower end jobs, like I've worked in lots of lower end jobs.
We talked about dishwasher last time you were
dishwasher,
on.
exactly.
You and I share a strong kinship of dishwasher.
Yeah. Well, I was dishwasher for a while, but then I was a short order cook.
Yeah.
And but more than that, more importantly than that, even while I was a dishwasher, once I kind of got the hang of it, which was a lot harder than you might think. Once I got the hang of it, I was valued member of that team. It's like, well, you're a dishwasher. It's like, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that I'm valued member of this team. And that was actually fun. Like, I was just a kid, I was 14. And I did my job properly, and I got treated like an adult. It was like, I loved that. That was great. And so the fact that are you a dishwasher or are you a 14-year-old adult? Hey, I'm a 14-year-old adult. Hey, I win that. Dishwasher, no dishwasher. It's like, that's a good game. And I really did like that. I mean, when I look back in my mid-adolescence, it's certainly the case that the times that were the best for me when I was working in restaurants, because I was part of the team, man. So